There is a generation that rarely asks to be seen. They don't flood social media with their opinions. They don't constantly seek validation. They don't try to dominate cultural conversation. And yet, they are the bridge between two worlds. This is Generation X, born roughly between 1965 and 1980. Gen X grew up during a time of social transition. They witnessed the shift from analog to digital, from rotary phones to smartphones, from handwritten letters to instant messaging. But their psychology was shaped by something deeper than technology. It was shaped by independence. Generation X is often called the latchkey generation. Many grew up in households where both parents worked. Many learned to come home to empty houses, cook their own meals, and solve their own problems. Psychologically, this creates self-reliance. When a child learns early that they must depend on themselves, they develop autonomy. They become resourceful. They become resilient. But independence also has another side. When you grow up solving things alone, you may struggle to ask for help later in life. Gen X tends to value competence over attention. They respect actions more than words. They are less likely to overshare their emotions, not because they don't feel deeply, but because they were conditioned to manage emotions privately. They grew up during economic recessions, corporate downsizing, and shifting family structures. Stability was never guaranteed. And when stability is uncertain, the brain adapts by becoming cautious. This is why many Gen X individuals are practical, skeptical, financially careful. They are not pessimistic, they are realistic. They learned early that systems can fail, jobs are not permanent, promises are not always kept. So they built internal stability instead. Another defining psychological trait of Generation X is adaptability. They remember life before the internet, but they also mastered it. They wrote papers on typewriters, then learned computers. They listened to cassette tapes, then burned CDs. They worked in offices, then adapted to remote systems. Their brains were trained to transition. Neuroscience tells us that repeated exposure to change strengthens cognitive flexibility. Gen X experienced multiple waves of change, so when the world shifts, they adjust quietly. They are not always the loudest innovators, but they are steady problem solvers. When it comes to work, Gen X tends to value balance. Unlike baby boomers, often find identity through career, and unlike millennials who seek purpose-driven work, Gen X often seeks stability and autonomy. They want to do their job well. They want independence. They want boundaries. This is not laziness, it is efficiency. Emotionally, Gen X may appear guarded. They are not raised in a culture that normalizes open mental health conversations. Vulnerability was not widely encouraged, so many learned emotional control instead of emotional expression. But that does not mean emotional absence. In fact, many Gen X individuals are deeply loyal. They value long-term friendships. They value consistency in relationships. Trust for them is earned slowly, and once earned, it is strong. Socially, they tend to be observant rather than reactive. They question authority, but they also distrust hype. They are skeptical of trends, marketing, and grand promises. Why? Because they grew up watching institutions shift and systems disappoint. Psychologically, skepticism is a defense mechanism built from experience. Yet beneath that realism is a generation that carried responsibility early. Many Gen X individuals cared for younger siblings. Later, they became caretakers for aging parents. They balance careers with family responsibilities without much public recognition. They are often described as the forgotten middle, not loud enough to dominate the past, not young enough to dominate the future, but psychologically they are the stabilizers. They hold perspective from both worlds. They understand life without constant connectivity. They understand the pressure of modern life. They remember patience. In a world of instant reaction, they often choose restraint. In a culture of oversharing, they choose privacy. In an economy of rapid change, they choose adaptability. Generation X is not dramatic. It is steady. Not attention-seeking, but observant. Not fragile, but quietly resilient. And sometimes, the strongest generation is not the one that shouts its strength, but the one that carries it without announcement. Another important psychological layer of Generation X is how they relate to authority. Gen X grew up watching institutions lose credibility. Political scandals, corporate layoffs, broken promises from systems that were supposed to protect people. Because of this, They don't blindly trust titles or power. Psychologically, they respect competence, not hierarchy. They question rules quietly. They comply when something makes sense, and they disengage when it doesn't. This is why many Gen X individuals prefer autonomy over supervision. Micromanagement feels suffocating to them. It triggers the same early lessons they learned as children, that relying too much on systems can leave you vulnerable. So they build self-sufficiency instead. Another defining trait is their relationship with stress. Gen X didn't grow up talking about burnout. They survive it. They learn to push through exhaustion because stopping was not always an option. Emotionally, this trained their nervous system to tolerate high levels of stress. The upside? They are calm in crisis. They don't panic easily. They can function under pressure. The downside? They often normalize stress. They may ignore emotional fatigue. They may delay asking for support. This is why many Gen X individuals experience burnout later in life. Quietly, internally, without warning. They are used to carry weight without complaint. When it comes to parenting, Gen X psychology often reflects our corrective instinct. Many raised themselves, so many try to be more present for their children. They value emotional awareness, even if they struggle to express their own feelings. They encourage independence, but they also try to offer safety, something they often lacked. This creates an interesting emotional contradiction. They want closeness, but they are wired for distance. They want connection, but they were trained for self-reliance. So they love deeply, but cautiously. In relationships, Gen X values consistency over intensity. They are not drawn to constant emotional highs. They prefer stability, reliability, trust built over time. They don't fall fast, but when they commit, they stay. Another overlooked psychological strength of Generation X is perspective. They live without constant comparison. No follower counts, no algorithmic pressure, no public performance of identity. So their sense of self is often internal. They don't measure worth through visibility. They don't equate silence with relevance. In today's attention economy, this makes them appear detached, but psychologically, it makes them grounded. They know that life continues even when no one is watching. As technology accelerated, Gen X adapted without losing skepticism. They use digital tools, but they don't worship them. They understand online culture, but they don't let it define them. This balance protects them from some modern psychological traps, like constant validation, seeking an identity fragmentation. Yet, they are not immune. Many Gen X individuals feel invisible in modern conversations, caught between younger generations who dominate online culture and older generations who dominate institutional power. This invisibility can lead to quiet resentment, not anger, not rebellion, just a sense of being overlooked. But invisibility also gave them something rare: freedom. Freedom from performance, freedom from constant explanation, freedom to live without narrating every moment. And psychologically, that freedom is powerful. Generation X learned how to live offline before the world went online. They know how to sit with boredom. They know how to wait. They know how to think without distraction. In an overstimulated world, that is not weakness. That is an advantage. And while they never ask for recognition, their psychology reveals something important. They are the quiet stabilizers of a fast-moving world. They don't chase the spotlight. They keep the system running silently. In the end, Generation X doesn't need to be explained loudly. They were shaped in the spaces between eras. They learned to survive without applause. They adapted without losing themselves. They don't announce their strength. They demonstrate it over time. In a world obsessed with visibility, they chose substance. In a culture driven by noise, they mastered restraint. Generation X reminds us that resilience doesn't always look dramatic. Sometimes it looks like showing up every day, carrying responsibility quietly, and moving forward without asking to be seen. They are not forgotten, they are foundational. And while history may not always spotlight them, the world continues to stand because they held it together when it mattered. Sometimes, the strongest generation is the one that never had to say it loud. Generation X was never built for attention. They were built for endurance. They adapted without applause. They survived without announcement. They carried responsibility without asking for credit. And maybe that's their real strength. Not loud, not flashy, but unshakable. If this video helped you see Generation X in a deeper way, or help you understand your own patterns a little better, consider subscribing. This channel is for people who like to think, who like to understand behavior, not just react to it, who are curious about psychology, generations, and the quiet forces that shape who we become. If that sounds like you, join this space. Because here, we don't just talk about trends, we talk about the mind behind them. Subscribe, and I'll see you in the next deep dive.